Mel, what are you working on for 2022?
Good question. I'm looking at the Greek influences on the Quran. And the reason being is I had a guest on my channel a few weeks ago who was an Alawite, and he actually said something really interesting. He says that the Alawites view the Greek philosophers as prophets. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I wonder, is there any connection there with the Quran? And what I've discovered looking into the Quran is there are definite influences there, definite points where they seem to be interested in Greek philosophers, not in a systematic way, but just a kind of a casual awareness. And what I was interested in is the fact that both then and now, the community living in Syria had a lot of connections with Greece. There were expats from the Greek community living in Syria, quite a large population. And these were people who could speak Greek and they could speak Syriac. And so that would speak to the idea that the Quran was written up there in the north. And I think this is going to be another avenue of interest. So that's what I'm planning to explore. There's probably going to be lots of other things as well. I'm interested in the Zamzam well as well at the moment. Yeah. And the mechanics of getting water to the people of Mecca. So that's also going to be a big area of interest.
Wonderful. I'm glad you brought this up because me and Jay are going through recording a video series right now, and one of the topics I will be addressing is the well of Zamzam. And again, I want to let all of my panelists know that I would love to invite each one of you individually into my live stream, my own channel, hopefully starting in January, according to your own schedules. And then at some point, we'll start bringing you also to the studio this way via Zoom, because I want people to really benefit from all of your findings and the research. And it's not really fair for all of you to be together because each one of you have tons of info that our viewers can benefit from. But today, think of it as just a way to introduce your work, introduce the faces behind those names that have been mentioned numerous times. And I'm thankful for all of you, of course. Murad, I'm going to ask you the same question, my friend, which is, what are you doing in 2022? But I want to address this. A question popped up a couple of times here. When we say Muhammad is the praised one, the question is in Arabic, it should have been Al-Muhammad. So I want you to take the time to answer this because I didn't want to respond to that question. It was directed basically to something you brought up. So go ahead.
Yes, you see, when someone says this, he is still thinking 100% Arabic. But it's written Muhammadun Rasulullah. So if you want to translate it like literally in English, it will be praised be the one, not the praised one. So praised be the Prophet of God. The Muhammadun is in Arabic we say sifa. It's a descriptive term.
That's right.
So no, you don't need the alif and lam here. You don't need the here. No problem here.
And I would agree with you because even though one of the names of Allah is Ar-Rahman, no Muslim in the right mind, when you say Rahman, they would gravitate towards someone else. They're always going to think Allah, basically. And that's why even if you use in this case, sifa, as you stated, you are using a description of someone that you don't have to use the definite article sometimes just to do that.
Yes, and also if you look at the name Muhammad, the way it's written, it's very like, if it's for a normal person, it will be very narcissistic. But Jesus Christ, at least he thought to be God, so it fits someone who thinks he is God, not someone who is normal. If you want it to be like a term that's normal, it will be Muhammad. Right. So the one who actually does the praising.
So, my friend, tell us, what are you working on for 2022? Is it the same thing? Is there something you are already researching? Are there things you want to surprise us and keep people anticipating?
Yes, I will look at the Aramaic meaning of the Quran, and I will start with the very small surahs in the back of the Quran, what they really mean. And as a surprise for future audience, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدْ, it's not really Unitarian like people think. It still has a Trinitarian element in it. And this is all cracked through Aramaic. And I want to look also at the names of the surahs, what they actually mean in Aramaic. So I will totally focus on the Aramaic layer. I will not really focus on geography or coins this year, because without the Aramaic meaning of the Quran, like we are lost, you see.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Looks like, Jay, Aramaic is the new way to go these days.
Actually, and you're not going to ask me this, so I'm going to tell you right now. In January, we'll be introducing a whole new paradigm. We're doing research, and I have my team in Britain who are researching this, and they're coming up with even more stuff. Right now, I've just been handed an 85-page research paper that's going to take this even one step further. With not just the Aramaic, it's the whole Syriac contingent that we're going to start introducing in January. We're not just going to look at the language. We're going to start looking at all the practices. We're looking at the beliefs. We're going to be looking at the doctrines. Wait till you see what we have found. And this is all coming out in January. So I want to whet people's appetite, but I don't want to really give it away. It's all going to be complementing what these guys are doing, but even more so, because it's just getting better and better. The more scratch, the more that we scratch, the more that we find. The more that we find, the more that we shine. The more that we shine, the more they whine. Oh, how sublime. And this is what all is going to be introduced coming January.
Yeah, I see some whiners in your channel, by the way. We know how to handle the whiners. We give them sheaths, but that's the way we do it. So, Odin, back to you. You are covering the big picture, and you were talking about the Caliph Abdul Malik. And I didn't mean, of course, to cut you off. I wanted just to make sure that everybody else get the chance also to jump in. But back to you now. What is it about Abdul Malik that you felt like was so damaging to the standard Islamic narrative? And what are you doing in 2022 in relationship to the big picture?
If you only list your vacation home on Airbnb.
The thing with Abdul Malik is that when you really look into him, into his beliefs, he does not appear as a Muslim. He appears as a sort of demigod, a sort of equivalent to Jesus, to the Messiah who should have come to establish God's kingdom. And everything with Abdul Malik is about this. It's about power. He claims to be the equivalent of the Messiah, and he also claims to be the equivalent of the Byzantium emperor. His title, his caliph title, is like the Basileus, kind of Basileus title that the Byzantium emperor bore. In Byzantium, the emperor had power over the religion and politics. And this is exactly what Abdul Malik did. So there is a sort of, he's a sort of mirror image of what's happening in Byzantium. Besides, when we look into it, Abdul Malik bore the title Khalifat Allah and not Khalifat Rasulullah. This is something to be considered. Why is it that we do not find this title Khalifat Rasulullah before the Abbasids? So there are lots of stuff going on with Abdul Malik, and I will keep on working on this topic in the next year. And besides, I will keep on addressing the English-speaking audience. I intend to publish my book in English. I intend also to write an article on the Quran with Dr. Edouard Marie Gallet, a scientific article which will explain what I call the Nazarene reading of the Quran. Nazarene as Jewish Nazarene, as the Nasara that we found, the Nasara phrase, the Nasara expression that we found in the Quran. And it will be a very scientific article telling us about the different people that we find in the Quran, the Kuffar, who are the Kuffars, who are the Nazarenes, who are the people of the books, people of the book, people of the scripture. And when we really dig into the Quran, we find that those people are not what the standard Islamic narrative tells about. For example, about a little thing about the people of the book. when you just read the Quran for what it is, you see that they are not all the same. It's in Surah 3, verse 113, for example. They are not all the same. There is among the people of the book a standing community. And you see that the Quran here, and also in many other passages, gives us evidence that there was a specific community among the people of the book, the people of the scripture, people of the sacred scriptures of this time, meaning the Jews. There was a good community among them. And so what did they do? I told you about an alliance with the Arab audience. So there will be a big article about this, making all things clear. And I have many other projects. I'm involved in an organization here in France called Mission Ismeri, which is dedicated to helping ex-Muslims, Muslims who converted to Christianity, and dedicated to spreading the gospel to them and also to teaching people about Islam. And I intend to develop a media project with a big studio, a bit like yours, Fadi. But we will address the French and maybe Arab audience. So many good things to come next year.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll get back to you, of course, in a second here about the other question. But Paul, can you also, I mean, you were talking about the Jerusalem theory again. What is so damaging in the Jerusalem theory to the standard Islamic narrative, and what are you working on for 2022 in the next few minutes, by the way, that we have here?
What I find is the most. I don't like to think of it as damaging because I don't really want to damage anyone or anything. But what I find is revelatory about the Jerusalem thesis is that the Quran actually makes sense. So much of the Quran, so many Muslims for the last 14 centuries must have sat there scratching their heads, saying, why on earth does the Quran say this? Why does it say that? Why is it telling us this story of Dhul-Qarnayn? Why is it telling us the story of Moses and the fish? Why is it telling us this or that? Why was Muhammad going out trying to conquer this place of Mecca? Why was he robbing the caravan trains? Why was he exiling and killing the Jewish tribe? So many questions in the traditional narrative. Where does the elephant come into it? Where does the elephant come from in Surah 105? And why does the Quran bother telling us about this episode, since it seems to have nothing to do with anything else? And what I find is the most revelatory part of the Jerusalem thesis is that the Quran actually makes sense. If one thinks of the instruction, expel them from where they expelled you, and then you put that not in Mecca, but you look at that as Jerusalem, and you look at what was going on at the time that the Quran was reportedly being announced, and you've got the Byzantine-Sasanian War. You've got this attempt in 614 by a party of Jews to re-establish worship at the Jewish temple, and they are expelled from Jerusalem, first of all by the Christian inhabitants and then by the Sasanians. And then you find that the Jews are then expelled from the whole of the Byzantine Empire at the end of the Byzantine-Sasanian War. And yet, what we find, as Mel was saying, all the early references to Muhammad have him leading military operations in Palestine in the 630s, in 634 with Thomas the Presbyter, in 637 the Gospel fragment or the Doctrina Jacobi, and you build up this very clear, I find very clear, very vivid picture of the Quran author inspiring people to fight to recapture Jerusalem at precisely the time that we know that Muhammad was fighting to recapture Jerusalem, and shortly before the Arabs do, in fact, recapture Jerusalem in 637, 638. So for me, the proof is very much in the pudding. The Quran makes sense if you put it into Jerusalem. in a way that it simply doesn't make sense. If you have to create story after story after implausible story in order to try and explain what the verses mean, you actually put it within a historical framework, and it makes perfect sense, I find. Or if not perfect sense, it makes an awful lot more sense than the traditional narrative.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. In 1 minute, what are you working on?
Okay, so what I'm working on, I've been working for 3 years on a thematic companion to reading the Quran, where I look at the Quran in 100 different themes, and for each one show which are the relevant verses of the Quran, then how they relate to what the Bible tells us, and then summarize what I think is the state of academic knowledge. But that's going to be quite a long project that may not complete in 2022. In the meantime, I'm going to put the Jerusalem thesis into an article, and I'm going to have it published in some sort of sensible way, because I think we have learned so much over the last few years. Mel, Jay, Odin, and the rest of us, we've all learned so much. We have to start writing it down into some sort of academic form. So I'm going to try and lead my own way on this, and write up the Jerusalem thesis as an academic article.
Wonderful idea. I definitely agree with you, and I hope everyone will be willing to write an academic paper or an academic book, hopefully. It'd be cool if all of you actually wrote a book and each one of you have contributed to a chapter, because I think it'll be fascinating. So we are wrapping up part 3, and Thomas, don't worry, my brother, I'll be back to you in a second here. So we are wrapping up part 3 of our podcast, Let Us Reason. But we are still, of course, doing the live stream. This is the next part will be the conclusion of this 2-hour-long live stream with fascinating panelists who are behind the many, basically, standard Islamic narrative proves that it has holes in it. And again, I mean, I want to use Paul's way of addressing this. We're not trying to destroy anybody. We're trying to actually just shed some lights on findings that appear to be contradictory to some of the points that the narrative actually is presenting. And the goal is to help all of us sift through it and find really what sticks and what doesn't. And with that in mind, I'm going to conclude now our part 3 of the podcast, Let Us Reason. Stay tuned for the next part, which will be in a few seconds here if you are with us live in studio. This is Fadi, over and out. Thank you. Okay, guys, this is part 4 of our, podcast, Let Us Reason, but this is a continuation of this 2-hour-long live stream concerning what we called the historical critique of Islam, introducing the S.I.N sifters. These are the panelists here. Those are the ones that have been pouring out their heart into researching and finding various topics, various evidence that the standard Islamic narrative, if we were to follow it the way it is, doesn't really at least line up sometimes with some of the findings. Now, there are ways to try to explain that, obviously, and that's what each one of these panelists is doing, taking an angle at this standard Islamic narrative to try to make sense of certain parts of it, and of course, shed some light on other parts as well. Well, we left off last time with Paul, and he mentioned to us about his passion concerning the Jerusalem theory and his interest in writing also, hopefully soon, an academic article to be published concerning that. But with that in mind, I want to now jump to Thomas. Thomas, why don't you tell us about what you will be working on in 2022? And then after you do that as well, go ahead and tell us in your own mind, basically, if you were to compare your own findings to what we call the textual criticism of the New Testament, or at least the Bible in general, what sticks out to you?
Assalamu alaikum. I am standing in the heart of Tampa, Florida, where the Muslim community is rapidly growing. And
okay, So as for next year, I already mentioned I'm currently working on a book, and I hope to finish it next year. This will also be a big picture book, if you will. It will be pretty long, I fear, but I want to cover basically for a lay audience what the Inara group has published over the last 20 years, more or less. Obviously, it won't go into that much detail because they published 10 books, each with 1,000 pages. But I want to put it in terms so that a lay audience can understand it, but it will also include all the references so you can dig deeper if you want to on any particular topic. So this big picture is what really interests me as well. And so last time we talked about, or the others talked about, what they think is like the most damning piece of evidence they're working on, their finding on this Islamic narrative. And what I think, it's not any individual piece, it's the fact that it all fits together. It's like this big puzzle, and we are making a picture out of it, and it actually works. And that's this Jerusalem hypothesis, it's the Aramaic language in the Quran, it's the Aramaic traditions that we know of in early Christianity. So for example, we know of these Aramaic Christians like Paul of Samosata, who was a bishop of Antioch. And when you look at his beliefs, it's almost the same as what you find in the Quran. And the same going forward, you have Afad, the Persian sage, again, very similar in his beliefs. You find tons of evidence from Aramaic literature. For example, this Alexander Romans that we find in the Quran, which really sticks out a lot, and that doesn't even make a lot of sense to put it in there. But when you know that this is an Aramaic Christian text written sort of as Byzantine propaganda, actually, but then taken by the Arabs, and the Byzantine propaganda part taken out, then you kind of understand where we're coming from. Or the book of the Cave of Treasures, again, very influential on the Quran. So I think it's really this bigger picture that's so fascinating, that all those individual people who are doing research in very different directions, but when they come back with the results, it all fits. I think that's really the best part. Now, as for your question regarding similarities or differences with biblical historical criticism, well, I would say, the biblical historical criticism is really where this all comes from. Right? That's when the methodology was developed, and I think unfortunately, it hasn't been applied to Islam as much as to the Bible, because I think we probably would have been a lot further in general, like with this topic if this had been done earlier. It started out really early, so it started out in the 19th century, early 20th century, but then it really hit the brick wall, and now we're just picking up again from where we left off, like in the 1920s, roughly. So I think it's great that this is happening now, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more and more results.
Thank you. Definitely, I'm enjoying this, and I hope you take me up on my offer to do a couple of live streams with me where you can unpack many of your findings, of course, because I want people to benefit from that. And of course, for me to add my flavor in terms of my background as well, as it speaks into what you're doing in terms of your research. So thank you so much. I appreciate you, Thomas. Mel, you and I have done a number of shows, but tell us, either, you can take one of two angles or maybe combine them together. The most damaging findings from your perspective concerning sin, or at least when you compare your findings to, for instance, the biblical narrative, what sticks out to you?
Yeah, I will show a slide here on the screen, if I may. I don't know if it can come up on my side.
Yep, it's come up.
Just wait for the team to... Okay, I'll just wait for it, yeah. Okay, so this slide here is where were the stations of Abraham. So in Islam, it declares that Abraham had a station way down in the Hijaz. But if we look at the biblical narrative, and we can dispute where Ur was, but If you look at Haran, Shechem, Beersheba, Jerusalem, Hebron, these are the places that we know were connected with Abraham. There's no biblical support for the idea that Abraham was ever down in the Hijaz. I think that's a big hole in the narrative there. And there is literally no evidence to support the Islamic narrative on that one. They just literally transposed everything down south. If you look at this image here, we know that in the Quran, it seems to be talking with a Jewish and Christian audience, and this is where we find the Jewish and Christian audience. It's basically in the Fertile Crescent, and we see Nestorianism up here, and we have Edessa, and we have obviously Jerusalem and so on. This is really I think, where we would expect the Quran to have come from and where we would expect Islam to have come from. The other thing is, if we think about the conflict at that time, the 7th century, think about the Byzantines and the Persians. They were in conflict there. That was the dividing line between the two sides. And you have the Ghassanids in the west and the Lakhmids in the east, who were both two Arab groups, and they were the buffer zone between the two empires. And really, if you want to ask the question, how did Islam begin? You first of all have to go back to what was the location of the conflict. Well, it was way up here in the north. There was nothing happening way down south in the Hijaz. And this is the center of the drama. So I think that tells its own story. If we look at this, and apologies for the big blue blob, it didn't come out so well here on this. But if you look at this map here, you can see the presence of Aramaic speakers in the 7th century, and then Hebrews there, and Arabic is down here. But if we take into account the fact that the Quran has a lot of not just Aramaic words, but stories that come from the Aramaic tradition, also from the Hebrew tradition, it fits for the Quran to have come from here. I think this image here really tells its own tale. Way down here, the people wouldn't be interacting with all of the various stories that abounded in the Syriac community. So it's an anomaly that should be really obvious to anyone who looks into it. If I take another example, the Nabatean alphabet is a halfway house between Aramaic and Arabic. And of course, the Nabatean alphabet is what the Arabic script came from. So it started out as a cursive form of Nabatean, developed into the Arabic alphabet from the 4th century, which is why Nabatean's letter forms are intermediate between the more northerly Semitic scripts such as Hebrew and those of Arabic. And due to this, it was possible to transliterate from Aramaic to Arabic easily. So when we hear talk about how the Quran was originally in Aramaic, or texts were in Aramaic first and it became the Quran, it makes sense when we take into account the fact that the Arabic script came out of the Nabatean alphabet. Right. And on this slide here, we can see the similarity between the scripts. And it's interesting, even the terminology that we find in the Quran, all the religious terminology, it's either Aramaic or Hebrew. Again, that tells its own tale. It supports the idea that this was in a milieu which was familiar with Christianity and Judaism. You don't find that way down in the Hijaz. If we take another example here, we find that the Nabatean script was refined in Hira, which you'll find here. And you'll also notice that all of the Jewish academies are around Hira. And now the Quran makes sense. It's in dialogue with the Christians, it's in dialogue with the Jews. It makes perfect sense up here. It makes no sense down in the Hijaz. And also what's interesting is you have the Manichaeans are in this area, who obviously have a lot of Gnostic influences and so on. So you can see here that Mani started here back in the 3rd century, and Manichaeism spread alongside Islam over the centuries. So that's interesting. And we can see elements of Manichaeism in the Quran as well. So obviously I'm just giving you a bird's eye view, but as you look at the maps, it becomes pretty obvious where Islam began. Here's another map, and it gives you an idea of the Jewish academies. So if we were looking for places where the people who wrote the Quran were interacting, guess number one would be here, where the Jewish academies are, and guess number two would be over here. You won't find that level of knowledge of Judaism anywhere else but these two places in particular. So that's where I'd be expecting the writers behind the Quran to have been interacting with people.
Right. Excellent point. If
I take one more example, if we think about the fact that, is it a coincidence that the Shafi and Hanafi schools developed in the same place and time as the Jewish academies? Now, this is a bit of a muddle of a map there, which I borrowed from the internet, but you can see that in black there, Pumbedita and Surah these are some examples of the Jewish academies, and Hanafi and the Shafi schools started there as well. And what's interesting is they paralleled the Jewish approach. So, for example, the Jews had the Torah and the Mishnah, Muslims had their Quran and the Sunnah, and the same sort of same sort of methodology you find in both. So this paints a northern narrative and not the standard Islamic narrative.
In Babylon.
And what's also interesting, if we look at this map here, you can see in dark blue is where Greek was spoken at the time. And here's the Hellenized area. And we mentioned earlier that the Alawites viewed the Greek philosophers as prophets. And what's interesting in the Quran, you find Galen's erroneous embryology. You find Thales' idea that everything is made out of water. These are both Greeks. And you also have references made to reincarnation, which is directly from Greek philosophy. I'm not probably going to go into all
Islam
of that
comes
now,
from
because I'm sure it's a
Galen?
bit too much.
Wow,
but I just
look
show
at
that there as evidence.
And Mel, I want you, brother, just to, if you can, if you want to wrap it up, if you want to focus on one last thing, maybe, just because I want to give time to our remaining guests here, because we have about 10 minutes left.
Yep. So the last point I would say is, again, up north, we have the origin of Al-Fitr. It came from Haran, and I've shown this on a video before, that there's very strong archaeological evidence to support that. So again, it proves that Islam came from the north. So if you look at the maps, look at the archaeology, I think there's a very strong case for Islam having begun in this milieu up in the north. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Mel. Jay?
No, I want to say something at the very end. Go ahead and get all these guys out, and then I want to say and wrap this all up and bring it together.
And by the way, so we have about less than 10 minutes left. So I apologize, Murad, Odin, and Paul, if you can just give us a quick answer to this question about maybe if you compare, your research about the standard Islamic narrative with the New Testament, for instance, or the Bible. Is there something specific that sticks out to you? And then Jay will wrap it up. After we close, please stay with us. We can interact with some of the questions that we've been receiving. So, Murad, if you can start, please.
Okay, just one simple thing. If the Kaaba and Mecca was really the house of Abraham, why didn't ever any Jew or Christian try and invade Mecca, Saudi Arabia? This is one. Now, when it comes with the Bible, every time you see new archaeological finds from Israel confirming the Bible. So actually, I don't believe in the Bible as salvation. I'm not a Christian, but I do believe that it is history. And everything written in it happened in history, and it is carved in stone. And that's it for me.
All right. Thank you. Odin?
Yes, to do it very, very quick. I think we have no evidence to show that the Quran is not an Islamic text. I know this is heresy. People must be saying, what is he uttering here? But when we look at the Quran, we don't see, when we look at the literal text of the Quran, we don't see Islam as much as proto-Islam, as something that came before Islam. And what we understand then is that the Quran is not the source of Islam, but a sort of byproduct. It is a product of Islam. Islam made the Quran out of previous scriptures. And particularly, one can look at the mentions of the word Quran in the Quranic text. And this is something I'm about to unwrap here, but there is a video in preparation with a recording that is scheduled with Jay, and we will get all the details of this. But what we see in the Quranic text is that the Quran that is designated is not the Islamic Quran, but it is another book, which is not the Islamic Quran. It is an Arabic lectionary, so a religious book, which is not the Quran, which is taken from the mother scripture, the mother kitab. And what is the mother kitab?
Yeah.
I think it is the Torah. I think those are Jewish scriptures. And we have so evidence in the Quran itself that the Quran, the Quranic text, Quran, is not the Islamic Quran, but another book. And I don't know how the standard Islamic narrative can cope with this.
Yep. Wonderful, wonderful. That's a good way to say it, and also this will be exciting for people to stay tuned for that. Paul, you get the last word before Jay, which you know, Jay always gets the last word.
Hi. It seems to me absolutely obvious, and it should have been obvious from day one, that the Quran is not intended to be read or recited as a standalone document. It is absolutely saturated by biblical references. Some of them are obvious, such as stories and the names of the prophets, and others are far more subtle and are only really now becoming popularly known, where Gabriel Said Reynolds has done fantastic work in tracking biblical turns of phrase in the Quran and little phrases, little combinations of words that show that it's intended to be read in conjunction with the Torah and the New Testament and the Psalms and other works. So where this all goes is that in order to understand the Quran, you've really got to read it within the context of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the Islamic world very belatedly needs to wake up and start doing this. And they need to start, Muslims need to start reading and learning about the Old Testament and the New Testament and the other parabiblical writings, the apocryphal Gospels and the Talmud and so on. And they need to start putting the Quran inside that framework. And that's where it's going. And that's where we need to put the Quran where it belongs within this Judeo-Christian tradition and stop with this nonsensical idea that it's a standalone document revealed in the desert, miles from anywhere, and only explicable by fantastical stories about winged horses and so on.
Yep. Thank you so much, Paul. Fascinating. Jay, you get 3 minutes, my brother, before I wrap it up myself.
Yeah, and I think if you've been listening to what all these fellows have been saying, you notice they're all saying, I'm getting a lot of text coming in, people saying, they're all saying the same thing. Well, lo and behold, if you start to sift all the standard Islamic narrative, what comes out at the end, what is the germ, the gem, the beautiful historical narrative that we are looking for? We're looking for the historical narrative. And when you look at the historical narrative, it goes back to what was actually there in the 7th century. Have you noticed when you pull away all the layers of the Quran, when you pull all the layers of Muhammad's character, when you pull all the layers of Mecca, the book, the man, and the place, when you pull all the layers and come to what you get at the very end, You see a 7th century environment of lots of different sectarian groups, Jewish and Christians, who are in that northern area, not down in the south. They're all up in the north, as Melo's been trying to really emphasize. But take a look and see what was happening there. There was a real internecine confrontation going on because they were waiting for Jesus to return, as Odin has always said. They didn't see Jesus return. Therefore, you're having different groups who are trying to get to ascendancy. When you start to see that ascendancy, who are the ones who are the ascendant? They are the ones, the Arians, who do not believe in Jesus as God. They are the ones that Abd al-Malik introduces, confronting the divinity of Jesus, confronting the Trinity, confronting his sonship. And what do? They are the ones that now have to create not only a man, a book, and a place, they've got to then create that identity, which they don't have, but the Jews and the Christians do. And that's why they start to introduce this man, Muhammad. He becomes a man. But what's fascinating, look at the book. The book really shows that there's a problem here, because when you start taking the text and the script out of it, look and see what Lulling found. Look and see what Luxembourg found. If you take out the harakat, if you take out the ijams, the harakat are the vowels, you take out the ijams, which are the dots. Take out the dots and the vowels, and you go back to the germinal text, you go back to the skeletal text of the Quran itself, you suddenly realize that this comes from another book. This is another book are these hymns, are these lectionaries, are these homilies that Odin's been talking about, what our good friend Thomas has been talking about, what Luxembourg and Lulling were discovered way back in the 1970s. Lulling's got destroyed, thrown out of the university system because of what he discovered 50 years ago and had to go into obscurity. And that text, when you go and see the text that the Quran comes from, take a look and see what it's all about. It's all about Jesus Christ. Really, the original Quran was all about Jesus. And that's what gets me excited, because what I have been struggling for 40 years, one thing that I've always been asking is, we need to get people back to Jesus. We need to bring the Muslims home. Have you not heard me say this so many times? Right? You've heard me say this for years, because you've been working with me for years. We need to bring Muslims home. And when we bring them home, let's take them away from the Quran that has bastardized these lectionaries. Remember what Odin said. Remember Odin on Surah 23 and Surah 70, when we unpack that. When you look and see this beautiful prayer in Surah 23, that's about the believers, what their duties are, and what's going to happen to the believers, what their rewards are. That beautiful prayer is bastardized in verse 6 and 7 by saying what chastity. Chastity allows polygamy and also allows that which your right hand possesses. That's a bastardization of a beautiful prayer that was to Jesus Christ and to believers. That is what the Quran has done. That is what Islam has done. That is what the Prophet Muhammad has done. He has bastardized my Lord. He has bastardized my book, and he has bastardized everything I know to be holy and true. And that's why I want to bring Muslims home. I want to bring them back to Jesus. I want to bring them back to the original Quran, which was all about this man and that place and that book.
Thank you. And thank you, our great panelists here. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And as I stated, I would love to reach out to each one of you to do 1, 2, maybe even more than that, live streams to focus on your area of expertise, some of the material you've shared with us here today. I apologize that the time did not allow for you to unpack everything, but this is just a teaser for people to at least get acquainted with your work. And again, thank you, Dr. J, for helping me coordinate all of this, and also Brother Mel, who played a factor in that as well. Again,